I still remember the day vividly, like it's etched into my memory with laser precision. The sunlight streamed lazily through the kitchen window, falling in warm slants across the wooden floor. I had just returned home from a long day, my mind weighed down by the usual grind of life, and all I wanted was a moment of peace. My mom was bustling around the living room, humming a tune I didn't recognize, a spring in her step that suggested she was up to something. There was a small gift bag on the counter, innocuous at first glance, just a modest, neatly wrapped package with colorful tissue peeking out. She grinned, her eyes sparkling with that mischievous glint she always had when she thought she had a little surprise up her sleeve. At first, I smiled politely, thanking her, my curiosity piqued. I had no idea what she had chosen, and I entertained thoughts ranging from something cute for my apartment to a gag gift she might have found in one of her impulsive shopping sprees. I tore at the wrapping carefully, savoring the anticipation for just a few seconds, until the paper gave way to reveal the contents inside. I froze mid-motion. There it was, lying in my hands, folded neatly, as if it had been carefully prepared for me with intent. A baby onesie. Not just any baby onesie, small, soft, and innocent-looking, the kind that belongs to newborns, the kind that makes people coo and smile. I should have felt joy or amusement, but the moment my eyes scanned the fabric, all warmth drained from me. The words printed across it in bold, unapologetic letters hit me like a punch to the chest, surprise baby of a disappointment. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I blinked, convinced I was misreading, convinced that maybe the angle of the light or the fold of the fabric had somehow distorted what I was seeing. I turned it over, examined every inch, hoping desperately that there was some hidden explanation, some innocent misunderstanding, but no, it was exactly what it looked like. I felt my heart tighten, a weird combination of disbelief and hurt settling in like an unwelcome guest. My mind raced, a torrent of thoughts clashing with each other. Was this supposed to be a joke? Was she trying to be funny in that way only parents sometimes attempt, where the humor is painfully skewed? Or was it something else entirely, a sharp, deliberate message wrapped in a soft, plush fabric? I looked up at her, trying to gauge her reaction, hoping for a flicker of guilt or a glimmer of apology that might soften the impact. But she was smiling, that same teasing, almost triumphant smile that made it impossible to tell if she was joking or serious. I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me, mixed with a sharp sting of anger. How could someone who raised me, who should be nurturing and supportive, present something so personal and humiliating in front of me? I couldn't help but glance around the room, almost expecting some hidden camera, some prank show reveal that would explain this bizarre, cruel scenario. The contrast between the softness of the onesie and the harshness of its message was surreal. It was the kind of moment that should have been tender or at least neutral, yet it carried a weight of judgment and condescension that left me reeling. I held it in my hands, turning it over, examining the print, the seams, the way it smelled faintly of detergent and something uniquely domestic. Every fiber seemed to mock me silently, a small, cruel reminder of the gift's underlying statement. I felt a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me, hurt, disbelief, and a reluctant, almost guilty laughter that bubbled up despite the sting. I didn't want to laugh, not really, but the absurdity of the situation demanded some response. In that moment, I realized that the gift was not just a piece of clothing. It was a message, intentional or not, that carried layers of meaning about family expectations, disappointments, and the complicated dynamics we often ignore until something like this surfaces. I could feel the room closing in slightly, the familiar surroundings of my home taking on a new, almost alien quality as the weight of the gift settled over me. The air felt thick, the normal hum of life replaced by a tense silence that only amplified the significance of what had just happened. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, to process the situation without letting raw emotion take over. My fingers lingered on the soft fabric, feeling the contrast between comfort and insult, warmth and judgment. It was like holding two opposing worlds in my hands, each pulling at me in different directions, forcing me to confront emotions I had long tucked away. I wondered how I should react, whether I should confront her immediately, laugh it off, or quietly put it aside and pretend it never happened. Every option seemed fraught with its own complications, yet none felt sufficient to match the intensity of what I was experiencing the moment I processed the words on that onesie. A flood of emotions hit me all at once, each one more intense than the last. It wasn't just surprise anymore, it was a whirlwind of confusion, anger, embarrassment, and a strange, helpless disbelief. I felt as though I were trapped in two conflicting worlds simultaneously, one where I was the child, hurt and humiliated, and another where I was an observer, watching this absurd, almost cruel scenario unfold in slow motion. My chest tightened, a physical reaction to the shock and discomfort I was feeling. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, loud and intrusive, as though my body itself were screaming that this was not normal, that no one should ever be on the receiving end of such a gift. Embarrassment surged next, sharp and immediate. I thought of all the people I knew, family members who might see this, friends who could somehow hear about it. The onesie was meant to be funny, perhaps in some twisted parental way, but all I could feel was the humiliation radiating through me. I imagined the scenario playing out in my mind, me, holding this tiny piece of fabric with its cruelly printed words, my face burning as I tried to keep composure. Would I laugh to hide my discomfort? Would I cry in frustration or rage? The tension in my chest was almost unbearable as I realized that even trying to play it off would not erase the sting of what had just happened. Anger came next, sudden and fierce. How could my mom, someone who had raised me and claimed to love me unconditionally, choose to give something so sharp and pointed in the form of a gift? I felt betrayed, not in the abstract way that one feels betrayal in the distant corners of life, but in an intimate, raw sense. This was personal, this was close to the core of who I was, and it stung because it was delivered with a smile, with that casual air of humor that made it seem as though she thought nothing of it. I wanted to ask her why, to make her see the impact of her words, to make her understand the weight of what she had just handed me, not in wrapping paper, but in judgment disguised as a joke. Confusion wrapped itself tightly around my thoughts. I kept trying to decipher her intent. Was she being playful, misjudging the line between humor and cruelty? Or was this something deeper, a reflection of her own frustrations, a way of sending a message I was only now beginning to understand? I replayed our past conversations in my mind, searching for signs, for clues, for moments that might have led to this point. Each memory seemed suddenly charged with new meaning, each casual remark or teasing comment now tinted with the possibility that it had been part of a pattern I had ignored or dismissed. I felt like an archaeologist uncovering a hidden structure, the foundation of which had always been there, but I was only now seeing its full shape. As the mix of emotions churned inside me, I realized there was also a layer of disbelief that refused to dissipate. The absurdity of it all made me question reality for a moment. How could someone think this was an appropriate gift? How could a message so sharply pointed, so personal, be dressed up in something so soft, so innocent-looking? The juxtaposition was jarring, almost surreal. I felt a strange sensation, the kind that happens when you witness something both ridiculous and painful at the same time, where your mind wants to laugh but your heart refuses to let you. I wanted to shake my head and tell myself it wasn't real, that this wasn't happening, but the evidence lay right there in my hands, undeniable and taunting. Every small detail seemed magnified, the way the onesie smelled faintly of detergent, the way the fabric was soft against my fingertips, the very way it had been folded and presented as a gift. All of it suddenly seemed loaded with meaning, as though even the act of giving had been part of the message. I felt trapped in a storm of internal conflict, each feeling battling the others for dominance. I wanted to cry, to scream, to confront, to laugh, to hide, all at once, and none of it seemed sufficient to express the complexity of what I was experiencing. The mix of emotions created a physical weight, pressing down on me as I tried to process what had just happened. I could feel tension in my shoulders, tightness in my chest, a knot in my stomach. My mind kept circling back to the same questions. How did it come to this? Why me? Was this a joke gone too far, or a reflection of something I hadn't yet understood? I couldn't shake the feeling that this single, seemingly small gesture had somehow exposed layers of my family dynamics, my relationships, and the unspoken tensions that had always lingered quietly beneath the surface. As I stood there, holding the onesie, the initial shock slowly gave way to a deeper understanding, one that made the situation even more complicated than I had imagined. It wasn't just about the words printed across the tiny fabric or the embarrassment I felt, it was about the underlying family dynamics that had led to this moment. Over the years, I had grown accustomed to my mom's sharp sense of humor, the way she could tease and poke fun at situations, but there was a fine line between playful teasing and something more cutting, something that left a lasting impression. In that instant, it became painfully clear that the line had been crossed, and the deeper truth about our relationship began to surface. I remembered countless moments from my childhood, memories I had brushed off at the time, now resurfacing with new significance. There were the times she criticized my choices under the guise of helpful advice, the subtle comparisons to others that left me questioning my worth, and the countless instances where her humor masked a pointed jab at my character. Holding the onesie, all of these memories collided, forming a mosaic that revealed patterns I hadn't fully acknowledged before. It was as if this single gift, seemingly innocent on the surface, had peeled back a layer of denial and forced me to confront truths I had quietly known but hadn't dared to examine. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that her joke was not random, it carried an unmistakable message. There was a weight of expectation, a shadow of disappointment that had silently accompanied me through my life, and now it had been distilled into this small, soft garment. The absurdity of the medium, the onesie, did nothing to soften the sting. Instead, it magnified it, creating a surreal tension between the innocence of the object and the harshness of the message. I couldn't help but marvel at the psychological precision of it, the way it managed to be both cruel and oddly clever, delivering a point that cut deeper than any words spoken in anger ever could. I started to think about the implications of this moment, not just for me personally, but for our family as a whole. The gift was a reflection of long-standing patterns of behavior, a symptom of dynamics that had been allowed to fester over time. It highlighted the unspoken rules of our household, the expectations, the judgments, and the ways we communicated indirectly instead of confronting issues openly. The onesie, in all its shocking simplicity, became a symbol of these hidden tensions, a physical manifestation of emotional currents that had always existed beneath the surface but were rarely acknowledged. In the midst of these realizations, a strange mixture of emotions settled over me. There was anger, yes, but there was also a sense of clarity. For the first time, I saw the situation not just as a personal affront but as an opportunity to understand, to analyze, and to confront. It was an invitation, whether intentional or not, to examine our relationship, to question patterns, and to consider the impact of words disguised as humor. I felt the tension between resentment and curiosity, a pull that made it impossible to react purely emotionally. I wanted to lash out, to demand an explanation, but there was also a quiet part of me that wanted to observe, to decode, and to learn from the moment. I noticed myself thinking about how I had reacted in the past to similar jabs or subtle critiques, the ways I had internalized them, and how they had shaped my self-image over the years. Holding the onesie, I recognized the cumulative effect of such moments, the erosion of confidence, the questioning of choices, and the lingering sense of inadequacy that often accompanies being the target of repeated, even if playful, critiques. The gift became a mirror, reflecting not only my relationship with my mom but also the ways I had internalized her humor and expectations, sometimes without even realizing it. Amid this swirl of realization, I also felt a subtle shift in perspective. I began to see that while the gift was hurtful, it also offered a chance for empowerment, a moment to reclaim my voice and assert my boundaries. The onesie had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths, yes, but it also presented an opportunity to transform discomfort into action, to turn a symbol of disappointment into a catalyst for change. It was as if the absurdity of the object and the audacity of the message had together created a moment of reckoning, one that demanded reflection and response, and in doing so, offered a glimpse of agency I hadn't fully acknowledged before. I could feel my mind organizing the chaos of feelings and memories, attempting to chart a path forward. The combination of hurt, confusion, and revelation was overwhelming, yet it was also illuminating. I realized that my response would need to balance honesty, assertiveness, and composure. I needed to acknowledge the impact of her words, understand their origin, and decide how I wanted to move forward without letting the weight of past patterns dictate my actions. The onesie, small and innocuous at first glance, had opened a door into a deeper understanding of family, relationships, and self-respect. After the initial shock and the whirlwind of emotions had settled slightly, I realized that staying silent was no longer an option. The onesie was not just a simple gift, it had crossed a line, and the weight of its message demanded a response. I knew that if I didn't act, if I allowed the moment to pass without acknowledgement, it would silently reinforce the idea that such behavior was acceptable. I had to reclaim my voice, assert my boundaries, and make it clear that this wasn't something I would let slide under the guise of humor. The decision to act wasn't easy, it required careful thought, patience, and a willingness to face potential backlash, but deep down, I knew it was necessary. I began by taking a moment to collect my thoughts, to organize the flood of feelings into coherent ideas that I could express without letting anger take full control. I realized that reacting impulsively could escalate the situation, turning what was already uncomfortable into something explosive. So, I focused on the underlying goal, to communicate the impact of the gift, to help my mom understand how hurtful it was, and to establish boundaries that would prevent similar incidents in the future. I wanted my response to be firm, yet calm, honest, yet measured. This required a level of self-awareness and emotional control that was difficult to summon in the heat of the moment, but it was essential. As I prepared myself, I also thought about the potential reactions. I imagined my mom's initial surprise, the possibility of defensiveness, and even attempts to downplay the situation as a joke. I knew that part of addressing this effectively would involve navigating her emotions while staying anchored in my own. It was a delicate balance, a dance between expressing my own feelings and managing the inevitable tension that would arise. I recognized that my goal was not to attack or humiliate her but to communicate clearly and assertively, to ensure that the message of the onesie was understood for what it truly was, a hurtful act disguised as humor. The act of speaking up also meant confronting my own fears. There was the fear of rejection, the fear of escalating conflict, and the fear that I might be perceived as overly sensitive. I had to remind myself that acknowledging pain does not equate to weakness, and setting boundaries does not mean creating distance. It meant standing up for myself, valuing my own feelings, and refusing to allow past patterns of behavior to continue unchecked. The courage required was not dramatic or heroic in the traditional sense, it was quiet, deliberate, and resolute, and it demanded more strength than I initially realized. I reflected on past instances where I had chosen silence in similar situations, moments when small jabs or veiled criticisms had gone unchallenged. Each time, I had internalized the hurt, allowing it to build over time until it became part of my emotional landscape. This time, I decided, would be different. I would not internalize the pain, I would confront it, articulate it, and, in doing so, reclaim a sense of control that had often felt elusive in family interactions. I understood that this required vulnerability, the willingness to be open about my feelings and to trust that my voice mattered, even when it challenged a long-standing dynamic. I also thought strategically about timing and delivery. There was no need to rush, no need to react impulsively in front of others or in a moment of heightened tension. I could wait for the right moment, choose a space where conversation could happen privately and respectfully, and prepare my words in a way that maximized understanding rather than defensiveness. It became clear that addressing the situation thoughtfully would not only help resolve the immediate conflict but also set a precedent for healthier communication in the future. As I gathered my resolve, I felt a subtle shift inside me, a growing sense of empowerment and agency. The onesie, which had initially felt like a weapon aimed at my self-esteem, was now becoming a catalyst for action, a tool for change. I realized that the power of the situation didn't lie solely in the act itself, but in my response to it. By choosing to confront, to speak, and to assert my boundaries, I was transforming a moment of humiliation into an opportunity for growth, understanding, and, potentially, reconciliation. I rehearsed the words I wanted to say in my mind, carefully weighing each phrase, each nuance. I considered tone, pacing, and clarity, understanding that the impact of my message depended not just on what I said but how I said it. The goal was to create understanding, not defensiveness, to communicate hurt without assigning blame in a way that shut down dialogue. I felt the weight of responsibility, not only to myself but to the potential of transforming a challenging family dynamic into something healthier, more respectful, and more mindful. Once I decided to take action, I knew that what I did next would define the rest of the interaction, and possibly even my relationship with my mom moving forward. It wasn't enough to feel hurt or to think about confrontation in my head. I needed to turn that emotion into tangible steps, into something that would shift the narrative from embarrassment to empowerment. I realized that the act of responding wasn't just about addressing the onesie itself, it was about reclaiming my dignity, asserting my self-worth, and demonstrating that I would not be defined by someone else's misplaced humor. Every move I made, from choosing how to speak to deciding when to act, became a deliberate effort to turn the tables in a situation that initially felt designed to undermine me. I started by considering the impact I wanted to create. I didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily, nor did I want to make my mom feel attacked. Instead, I wanted my reaction to be a clear statement that words and actions, even disguised as jokes, carry weight, and that I was no longer willing to accept moments of humiliation silently. I wanted her to understand not only the hurt that this gift caused but also the larger implications of dismissive humor within our family. I thought about the power of presence, the strength in calm and measured responses, and how choosing to act deliberately could have a far greater effect than reacting impulsively in anger. The moment of action required both courage and creativity. I couldn't simply hand the onesie back or storm out. It would have ended too quickly, leaving the message unspoken and unresolved. Instead, I decided to make my reaction visible, intentional, and reflective of my feelings. I held the onesie up, allowing her to see the impact of the words through my eyes, through the tension in my posture, the hesitation in my movements, and the quiet, almost palpable disappointment in my expression. It was subtle, but it conveyed far more than words alone could capture. This silent statement allowed the weight of the gift to speak for itself, forcing her to recognize the effect it had before any conversation even began. Once I felt the initial tension settle, I began to articulate my thoughts. I spoke slowly, carefully choosing words that reflected the depth of my emotions without descending into blame or recrimination. I described the surprise, the shock, the embarrassment, and the hurt, emphasizing how something intended as humor had instead highlighted vulnerabilities and unspoken family pressures. My voice wavered at moments, not from weakness, but from the intensity of reliving the feelings in real time. Every word was an effort to bridge understanding, to transform pain into dialogue, and to create a space where acknowledgement could occur. As I spoke, I noticed a shift in the room. My mom, initially smiling with the confidence of someone who thought the situation was lighthearted, began to show signs of surprise and perhaps even guilt. The realization that her actions had consequences, that her joke was not received as intended, seemed to dawn on her. It was subtle, a pause, a downward glance, a slight tightening around her mouth, but it was unmistakable. In that moment, I felt a quiet validation. I realized that the act of confronting her with my perspective had already begun to alter the dynamic, showing that even within complex family relationships, awareness and understanding could emerge if approached thoughtfully. The reaction also sparked internal clarity. I could feel the empowerment growing within me, the sense that I had reclaimed control over my emotions and my response. By addressing the gift head-on, I was refusing to be defined by the message of the onesie or the intent behind it. I was asserting that my self-worth, my dignity, and my voice mattered more than a single moment of humiliation. The act of speaking up transformed the situation from one of passive suffering into an active reclaiming of agency, demonstrating that even difficult and awkward encounters could become opportunities for self-assertion. I also realized that my actions could ripple beyond just this one interaction. By confronting the issue, I was setting a precedent for future moments, establishing boundaries and expectations for how humor, gifts, and communication would operate within our family. The message extended beyond the onesie, signaling that respect, understanding, and accountability were non-negotiable, even in moments framed as playful or lighthearted. I felt a quiet pride in knowing that this choice, this deliberate act of response, was not just about addressing a past slight but also about shaping a healthier path forward. Throughout the process, I felt an intense focus on the balance between strength and compassion, assertiveness and patience. It was a delicate equilibrium, demanding mindfulness and emotional regulation. Every word, every gesture, and every pause mattered, contributing to the overall impact of my response. The situation, once so humiliating, had now become a canvas on which I could paint not only my feelings but also my resilience, my intelligence, and my capacity for thoughtful confrontation. The final piece of the story unfolded in a way that none of us could have predicted. After confronting my mom, after speaking up and reclaiming my voice, there was a moment of silence, a pause thick with tension that felt almost eternal. I watched her carefully, trying to read her expression, wondering whether she would laugh it off, argue, or finally acknowledge the weight of her actions. That silence held a strange power. It was as if the room itself was waiting for the next move, the turning point where the story could go in any number of directions. I could feel the tension vibrating through my own body, every nerve ending alert, every sense heightened by the unpredictability of what was about to happen. Then, slowly, something unexpected occurred. Her posture softened, her face shifted from amusement to something more reflective, almost vulnerable. The words I had spoken, the emotions I had expressed, seemed to penetrate in a way I hadn't fully anticipated. I realized in that moment that confrontation, when delivered with honesty and composure, had a power that could bridge gaps, even in relationships where tension had long been normalized. The onesie, once a symbol of embarrassment and ridicule, had become a catalyst for dialogue and, ultimately, understanding. It was remarkable how a single act of speaking up could ripple outward, altering perceptions and breaking down barriers that had existed for years. As she responded, her voice initially tentative, I noticed a shift not just in her words but in the energy of the room. The defensive air that had hovered vanished slowly, replaced by something quieter, more conciliatory. She began to explain, not to excuse, but to provide context for her actions. Her explanations revealed insecurities, misunderstandings, and old habits that had never been addressed directly before. Hearing her perspective, I felt a mixture of empathy and relief. It didn't erase the impact of the onesie, but it added layers of understanding, showing that behind the humor, or cruelty, was a person navigating her own complexities, just as I was navigating mine. In that moment, I recognized the unpredictable power of confrontation when it is rooted in clarity and self-respect. By refusing to let embarrassment dictate my actions, by standing firm in the face of a hurtful situation, I had not only asserted my own worth but also created the conditions for change within the relationship. The atmosphere shifted subtly yet palpably. The tension that had seemed insurmountable began to dissolve, replaced by a tentative openness, an opportunity to rebuild and redefine boundaries. It was as though the simple act of speaking truth had illuminated a path that had been obscured by years of unspoken expectations and habitual patterns. I also noticed the impact on myself internally. A sense of empowerment surged through me, quiet but undeniable, as I realized that taking action had transformed the dynamic. I no longer felt like a passive recipient of judgment or embarrassment. I had turned a moment of vulnerability into a demonstration of strength, and in doing so, I reclaimed agency over my emotions and my reactions. This wasn't about winning or losing, it was about asserting presence, making sure that my voice, my feelings, and my dignity were acknowledged and respected. That realization filled me with a confidence that was both humbling and exhilarating. The unexpected reaction also opened the door to reflection. I thought about the power of small objects and gestures, like the onesie, to carry enormous weight in family dynamics. Something seemingly insignificant can trigger deep-seated emotions, expose hidden tensions, and prompt meaningful change. I realized that moments of conflict, embarrassment, or awkwardness often carry within them the seeds of growth and transformation, if one is willing to confront them thoughtfully and courageously. By leaning into discomfort rather than avoiding it, I had turned a situation that could have been a source of shame into a moment of insight, resilience, and personal development. Even as the conversation continued, I felt the underlying bond between us subtly shift. There was a sense of mutual recognition, an acknowledgement that the old patterns had been disrupted and that something new was emerging. The onesie, with all its audacity, had unexpectedly become a pivot point, a moment that forced honesty, vulnerability, and communication to the forefront. It reminded me that even in relationships fraught with complexity, moments of tension can create openings for understanding, empathy, and deeper connection. Throughout the interaction, I could feel the tension and awkwardness gradually giving way to a new rhythm, a recalibration of sorts. The surprise, the embarrassment, and the initial shock had all served as catalysts, propelling us toward a moment of clarity and dialogue that would have been unlikely under ordinary circumstances. I began to see that these dramatic, uncomfortable moments, when handled with care and courage, often leave lasting impressions, shaping relationships in ways that simple harmony never could. I also realized that the ripple effects extended beyond just the two of us. The way I responded, the composure and clarity I maintained, could serve as an example for others in the family, showing that it is possible to confront difficult situations without escalating them, to assert boundaries without causing harm, and to transform embarrassment into empowerment. It was a lesson not just in family dynamics but in life itself, the idea that even the most awkward, shocking, or uncomfortable moments can be harnessed as opportunities for growth, self-expression, and unexpected resolution.